Do you want to make bird watchers at home and learn how to go from this to a spirit? Stick around. Okay, welcome back guys. So as I said in the intro, we are making a basic sugar wash using our tomato puree, or affectionately known as Birdwatchers. So with these basic ingredients over here, we will create a wash that we're going to use for gin and vodka. So in other words, we are going to be making a neutral spirits that we are going to be distilling through this still over here. So this is my reflux still that I use. Video on how I built this is either up already or will be up soon. So check in the card up top whether that video is uploaded. So, but before we get to that, for the guys that have been following along on the ciders, over here we have our lemon cider that we created a couple of days ago. So this lemon cider has been standing and fermenting now, and has now reached almost maximum fermentation. So what we need to do now is we need to clarify this solution, or this brew, or whatever you want to call it. And by clarifying it, we will be removing the majority of the sediment and getting it nice and clear. I said in the previous video that we're going to be using normal gelatin to do this. I will also be doing exactly the same step, exactly the same way I'm doing it here now with my sugar wash once this has fermented out in about 5 to 7 days, depending on how long it takes for this fermentation to stop. So simple as taking your unflavored gelatin. Make sure you check for the unflavored one. It must say it on the packet, it must say unflavored. Just make sure that you get the clear unflavored ones. Don't get any strawberry or raspberry or whatever you want. That will just add flavor into it, and you don't want that. So a normal packet of clear gelatin, a sterilized fork. Remember, everything needs to be nice and clean. So everything, once again, that I'm using has been sterilized. Okay, so we are adding the gelatin into lukewarm water, not hot, just lukewarm, and we are going to stir it up. So what we are looking for is for this to completely dissolve into this liquid here. So we want it to completely dissolve away. And then once that is dissolved, we are going to be pouring it in here. So I'm just going to stir around here. Okay, so now that the gelatin has dissolved inside of the water here, what we're going to do is we're going to add it to this vessel over here. So let's remove our airlock. Put our airlock to one side. Remove our cap. Remember, this is a quick process. You don't want to leave your beer open for too long. But what I want to do quickly is I just want to do a quick taste test on this to see where my flavors are at. So I'm just going to pour off a little bit and just taste the flavor. Okay, yeah, that has a nice kick to it, a lovely lemon flavor to the back, and almost all the sourness has disappeared. So with this here, once all the yeast has flocculated out and settled down into the bottom, this will make a very nice cider. So let's add our gelatin into our mix. Okay, so with our gelatin added, we just need to give this a quick shake up, allow all the gelatin to move all the way around and move all the way through the liquid, so not just settling on top. So So give me a couple of seconds while I just shake this up. Okay, so now that this bad boy is all shook up and the gelatin has moved all the way through, okay, it's not, you don't need to over shake it or over agitate it. When you're using it in a bucket and you have a big opening, I luckily have a small opening that I can close with my finger to prevent oxygen from coming in. If you use a bucket, stir it nice and slowly. Don't incorporate too much oxygen into the system, because that oxygen will reactivate your yeast and then you might get some off flavor. So in a bucket, nice and slow stirring. If you have something that you can close off the entry gap, you can shake it like I did. Okay, I stuck my finger in the hole, shook it up, decreased the amount of oxygen into it, and got my airlock back in as soon as possible. What's going to happen now is the gelatin that's now all the way through this solution will rise all the way to the top. Once it solidifies on the top, it will become waterlogged, and then it's going to start slowly moving down to the bottom, dragging all the impurities and all the little bits and bobs, including the yeast particles that have been suspended in here, all the way down to the bottom, leaving you with a crystal clear cider on top. So in about 3 days, you can transfer this to your bottles, bottle condition it, and have it ready to drink. Cool. Let's move on to our video that you guys came here for, our sugar wash or our Birdwatchers. Okay, so the thing that you all came here for, the sugar wash or the Birdwatchers, or the base to create a neutral spirit. So the big question on everybody's mind, or the question I get asked a lot, is brown sugar versus white sugar. I go with white sugar for my sugar washes. Reason I go for white sugar, it's slightly less expensive than your standard brown sugar, and the difference between the brown sugar and the white sugar is so small that you won't be able to pick it up. The main difference is that brown sugar is less refined than your white sugar, but it still has some refining done to it. The majority of the molasses have been removed. There's only a little bit of brown tinge to it, so it might have a little bit of more nutrients and stuff in it that will allow your ferment or your sugars to be absorbed a lot better by your yeast, and then leaving you with a drier end ferment, meaning that you can go all the way below 1 for your fermentation, and it will ferment all the way out, where your white sugar will leave a little bit of a sweetness behind. But yeah, at the end of the day, we are going to be using baker's yeast and not brewer's yeast. So for the amount of alcohol and stuff we're dealing with when we're doing distillation, or when I'm doing distillation, that doesn't really matter to me. So standard white sugar works fine. If you want to go for a brown sugar base and you want to use brown sugar, check if you can substitute half the sugar with this treacle sugar over here. Now what this treacle sugar is sugar and molasses mixed together. So they've added some of that molasses back into into the brown sugar, and that will give you that molasses flavor, that nice sweet cane sugar flavor at the end. If you want that flavor profile to carry through in your distillate. So when you go for brown sugar, go for the brown sugar, but add a packet of this in there as well, or a tablespoon or 2, depending on the volume that you're going to be working with, of molasses into it, if you're using white sugar and not brown sugar and you want that that molasses flavor. So yeah, okay, to the point. So I'll be using white sugar. So this is a standard 5 kilogram bag of white sugar. We will be using tomato paste. This is a 120 gram packet, or 120 ml packet if I'm not mistaken. 120 gram packet. I will be using standard baker's yeast. So the baker's yeast I've got here is the normal instant yeast that you can buy, the purple packet. I use 2 packets, as you can see over here. I have my other yeast that I've taken off. There will be a photo up top here somewhere of that yeast. I've taken that yeast that was left over. I added 2 more packets of instant yeast to that whole yeast that I've recovered from my previous batches. Left it so it started activating, and yeah, juice of 1 lemon, and I'll also be using 1 teaspoon of some Epsom salts. This is just a nutrient to add to the water to get the yeast to go and chew up. If you have a vitamin tablet, multivitamin tablet, crush it up, add it to your batch. So we'll be making 20 liters today. Let's get to it. First up, dissolve the sugar in the water. Okay, so while we wait for the sugar to start dissolving in the liquid over there in the water, I'm just going to add my other ingredients quickly. First up is my Epsom salts. So exact recipe down in the description. And remember, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, please do so. Smash that subscribe button at the bottom there. If you like these kind of videos where we do everything ourselves, DIY. Okay, so the juice of 1 lemon. Don't worry about the pips and stuff. We are going to be clearing this with our gelatin, same as we did with the cider, and that will drag everything down to the bottom. So all of that will be cleared out, because the cleaner your mash goes into your kettle, the cleaner your distillate comes out in the end. Next up, our tomato paste. So the recipe actually just calls for 100 grams, but I'm adding 120 grams just because the packet is 120 grams, and as this is the nutrient and none of the tomato flavor is going to pull through on the end product, this is just the nutrient for the yeast to eat. So don't worry about the flavor of tomato pulling through. There we go. And as always, try when you are in this process of mixing everything before pitching your yeast to get as much oxygen into this as possible. If you have a fish tank pump, an air pump or whatever with one of those air stones, you can drop it into your canister and allow it to aerate everything up until the point before you pitch your yeast. So the more oxygen that you start off with, the faster your yeast is going to kick up, the faster it's going to eat up all the sugars, and the faster your ferment's going to go. So try to get as much oxygen in there as possible. So everything I'm going to be pouring in and everything, I'm going to try and do it from a height so it drops in, pulls as much oxygen into the solution as possible. Okay, so this is a full 10 liters of water that I've added to my vessel over here. Just going to give it a nice little shake up to allow us as much oxygen into this bad boy as possible. So just get it up and shake it. Okay. Next up, sugar water into the mix. Okay, so this just came off the stove. I allowed the sugar to dissolve in here completely. So this is like a sugar syrup at the moment that I'm going to be adding to my vessel over here. I've got 2 pots, each of them roughly about 5 liters of liquid in them. So let's get adding. Okay, so I've given it one last good shake up, allowing all the liquid to get nice and mixed together. Next up is just test the temperature so I can pitch my yeast. I try to get my yeast temperature close to my mash temperature so I don't shock my yeast when I put it into the liquid. And that's also one of the reasons why I pre-hydrate my yeast. Just a quick chat about yeast. I use, a lot of the time, I use the baker's yeast instead of the brewer's yeast. Number one, it's easier to come by. Number two, it's a lot cheaper. And for this kind of stuff I do with the ciders and the beers and that type of stuff, if I'm doing a very specific beer, I would use a specific yeast strain to produce the specific beer that I'm looking for. But general on my ciders and that type of stuff, if I can get my hands on a good different type of yeast, I'll use it. But in a pinch, brewer's yeast, baker's yeast works fine. Like I said, this year I'm aiming for a specific gravity of around 1090 or 1090. That will ferment out. Once completely fermented out, down to about 1 or 966 will give me about 11% alcohol, maybe 12%. But this yeast will top out at about 11%. So if I don't stress the yeast too much, I'll get about 11% out of this baker's yeast here by adding that Epsom salts in there and adding a lot more sugar to this, because I'm not looking for flavor like I do in the ciders. I'm just looking for alcohol so I can distill it out. So here's my pre-hydrated yeast. It formed a nice head already. You can see it's nice and foamy on top. And some of the stuff has already started flocculating out. I'm gonna give it one last good shake up, add it to this, give it one last good shake, pop my air filter in, my airlock in the top, and leave it to ferment. As you can hear, it's very active. So now, once it's all shook up, add it to my fermenter. Get my cap back on. Now I'm going to add my airlock once it's down below my staircase. This baby needs to be at about 30 degrees centigrade to ferment out, because we want a nice quick ferment and we want that yeast to produce a high yield, where with our cider it's about 18 degrees. So what I'll do with this baby is I will heat it up every now and then using a heat lamp or a fish tank heater to get it back to 30 degrees and try and keep it there or maintain it there as much as possible. But the blanket will keep it rather consistent. Last but not least, guys, if you want to see me run this distill or the pot at the back here, please let me know in the comments down below. I will gladly film that and add it on there when I distill the vodka or the neutral spirit out of this Birdwatchers that I've made. Thank you once again, guys, and remember to like, comment and subscribe. And as always, my email address will be here somewhere if you want to get in contact with me personally. Thank you very much.